Let's look at different ways that we can concatenate our strings. We can put them together. Now, this example here in this working with strings example, this is what you might expect in another language, adding strings using the plus sign. Well, this is not how you would do it in PHP. Remember that we can have strings that can be integers and integers that can be strings, and the types are interchangeable for the most part. Well, if we have strings here and then we try to add them, it's going to give a different value. It's not going to give what you expect. When you concatenate strings, you use the dot. Now, the dot can have spaces around it, or it doesn't have to have spaces. This is how you put strings together. There are other ways to do that as well, and they're going to require string functions to do that, or user-defined functions. But you can see here that if we put this together, these three strings together, then we're going to actually have the strings output in string 10. Keep in mind, though, that if we have three strings here, it doesn't mean that we necessarily are going to get any white space between those three strings. So we have to put our own white space in, and this is going to indicate that we have one space in between these three strings. You can put as much or as little text in there as you want to. Also note that this defines the other point, that you can have strings that are variables and you can have strings that are literal strings in quotes. So you can mix and match as you need to. You also want to see the other functions, like sprintf, for example, and some of the functions that you can work with to put your strings together. And there are many functions that you can use, actually, to really get things going with strings. If we slide down the bottom here, you can see that we're using echo with a comma separated list. So in other words, this is going to echo out this, this, and this. So it's like concatenating it for the output, but it's not actually putting those together physically. It's just displaying them that way for the output. And you can see I also use the dot here as well, because you can mix and match. So in other words, this is a little bit of a pair, etc. as you move down. But they're all ways to get this echo to work together, to bring things together. I could have very easily put another comma there, or I could have just put all dots instead of the comma, and you get the idea. Use as much white space here as you want to, because you can use white space outside of your strings, and that doesn't really affect anything. It's just formatting of your syntax for your PHP code. But if you put white space in your strings, of course, that's going to affect how many white space characters you have that are going to be output if you should print it or use it or do whatever with your strings. And then also note that this particular example is not going to output anything, because, as I've mentioned, this is wrong because actually we do the plus here, right on this line here, and that's going to yield a 0 value. It's not going to be correct. So you want to take note of that. But that's one way to concatenate your strings together. And there are many ways to get that to work, but that's the easiest and most effective way.